Okay, so have you ever had one of those nights, where it's like 3 in the morning and something's broken in production,
Oh,
and you're
yeah.
just drowning in logs, like a million lines of useless information? It's that awful needle in a haystack feeling, only digital, right? I think anyone who's ever, been on call has been there.
Definitely. It's one of the most frustrating parts of the job, and it really makes you appreciate, I think, how important good logging is.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you're under that kind of pressure, well, good logs, they're a lifesaver.
Right, they make all the
Yeah.
difference. So that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. How to create logging that actually helps, that makes your life easier instead of harder.
Hmm.
We've been looking at some really great expert advice on this, and the goal today is to really pull out the most practical, actionable tips so you can start improving your logging, right away.
And what's so fascinating about logging is that it's more than just like a technical detail.
Right.
It's really about understanding how your systems work.
Hmm.
It's about being proactive instead of just reacting to problems?
Right. And a big part of this is, really understanding what questions to ask before you even write a single line of logging code, which,
Exactly.
sounds kind of obvious, but it's something we don't always do, right?
No, not
We
all.
kind of just jump in and start, print statements everywhere or whatever.
Mm,
But the experts we've been looking at, they really emphasize thinking strategically about logging.
right.
Like, what are the goals of your application? What are the most critical operations that you absolutely need to monitor? And what are the KPIs, those key performance indicators that really matter?
Like in terms of system health
Yeah,
and performance. Yeah.
exactly. That kind of thinking up front, it really pays off later.
Oh, absolutely.
So just to give you an example, let's say you're logging errors, right? The goal isn't just to say, hey, something broke,
Right.
but to actually provide enough information so that you or whoever's on call can actually figure out what went wrong and how to fix it.
Hmm. And that's something that we really focus on at Stonefly, providing those really clear, actionable insights to help understand what's happening.
Right.
And for anyone who isn't familiar, Stonefly is a pioneer in sand technology, serving customers as a trusted solution company for over 2 decades.
Right.
So if you're interested in learning more about how Stonefly can help you with data solutions, please visit us at isqs-z.com or stonefly.com or email sales@stonefly.com.
Great. Now back to this idea of logging errors, thinking about the context, like what was the user doing? What was the state of the system? What led up to the error? That kind of information is gold.
Yeah, and it's like thinking about your future self
Right.
debugging at 3 a.m. What will you need to know?
Exactly, exactly. And here's another tip that might sound counterintuitive, but the experts actually suggest you might want to overlog at first
Really?
and then trim things down later. The thinking is that it's easier to remove unnecessary logs than to try and add missing information
Right.
when you're, in the middle of a crisis.
Makes
So you
sense.
kind of cast a wide net at first, then you can go back and refine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like how we approach things at Stonefly.
Yeah.
When we're setting up data monitoring for customers, it's an iterative process, and
Mm.
you learn as you go.
Right, right,
But the key is to actually do that review,
right.
to go back and say, okay, what's useful, what's noise, and get rid of the clutter. Keep those logs focused.
And that's just good data management.
Right.
And Stonefly has been a leader in sand technology for over 2 decades.
Yes.
And we know a thing or two about efficient data management.
That's right. That's right. So, okay, we've talked about the why of logging, but let's move on to the what and when.
Okay.
And that brings us to the concept of log levels,
Right.
which is basically a way to, categorize the importance of your log messages.
It's like a system for prioritizing information.
Right. And the most common levels are, well, there's info, which is for, the normal stuff, the day-to-day operations, like
Hmm.
a successful user login, a completed transaction, things that you generally want to track.
Right, for business insights, auditing, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And at Stonefly, we really emphasize the importance of capturing that level of detail.
Hmm.
It's crucial for really understanding how things are working.
Absolutely. And then you have warning, which is like a heads up, right? Something's maybe not quite right, but it's not a full-blown error yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe a payment processor's running a little slow.
Right, right. So it's like an early warning system.
Exactly, exactly. Then you've got error, which is the real deal, right? Something has actually gone wrong,
Mm,
like a failed payment or a service that's encountered an exception, an actual problem.
right, something that needs to be addressed.
Yes. And then finally you have Fidel, which hopefully you don't see too often.
Right. Knock on
And this
wood.
is like a major system failure.
Yeah, like a system crash.
Yeah, something catastrophic. Now, what's important to remember is that in production, you're usually going to default to the info level just to keep things manageable, right?
Right. You don't want to be overwhelmed by too much data.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, you need a way to increase the level of detail when you're debugging.
Right.
Like if you need to really dig into a specific issue, you need to be able to crank up the verbosity.
Get that granular information.
Exactly. And luckily, most loading tools already have this built in.
That's good.
You can usually adjust the verbosity on the fly.
Right.
And it's really important to have that same flexibility in your own applications.
It's just like how Stonefly provides different levels of access to data
Right.
depending on the customer's needs,
Mhm.
You have to have the right information available when you need it.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about log levels, which are essential for humans to understand the severity and importance of different log messages.
Yeah. And then the next step is thinking about how to make logs understandable by machines, right?
Right, right. Because more and more, we're relying on tools to analyze and act on log data.
Exactly. And that's where structured logging comes in.
Right, structured logging. So the experts really emphasize the difference between, just basic text-based logging and structured logging.
And they even showed like a side-by-side comparison
Oh, yeah.
in the video. It was really striking. On
Yeah.
the one hand, you had this big block of text.
Oh, I know. Like a wall of text.
And on the other, you had these clear labeled data points.
Much easier to make sense of.
So much easier.
And I loved how they called unstructured logs expensive text files.
Right. It's so true.
It's true, because they are. And the point is, if you have structured logs, you can actually do things like filter for specific types of errors, or you can search within a certain time range. You can do really powerful queries.
Yeah, like finding all the timeout errors that happened, say, last Tuesday.
Exactly, which would be a nightmare with unstructured logs.
Oh, a total nightmare.
And the good news is that a lot of logging frameworks support structured logging out of the box.
Yeah. So, if you're not already using it, it's definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. But, what if you're stuck with a legacy system that only outputs unstructured logs?
Well, the video mentions some tools that can help with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Vector, which can transform your, unstructured data into JSON or other structured formats.
That's really useful.
Oh, yeah. It's a lifesaver for dealing with those legacy systems.
And it really highlights how important structured data is, which is, something we at Stonefly are very familiar with.
Right.
Making sure data is organized and accessible.
That's our bread and butter.
Exactly. All right. So moving on, let's talk about what should actually go into your log entries.
Okay.
Because there's a big difference between a log message that says, like, something's wrong,
Right.
and one that actually gives you the information you need to fix the problem.
You need the context.
The context, yes.
The who, what, where, why?
Exactly. The who, what, where, and more. So, for example, if you're logging a failed login attempt, a bad log might just say, Lugin failed.
Right.
But a good log would tell you, who the user was, maybe their location, what kind of device they were using, the number of attempts, give you the full picture.
That's so helpful.
It is.
Because then you can actually start to understand what happened.
Right, right. And there's a whole checklist of useful things you can include in your logs.
Oh, like what?
Like request IDs, which are really helpful for tracing requests across, multiple services.
Especially in microservice architectures.
Exactly. And then user IDs, obviously, to know who was doing what.
Right, right.
And then, data about the state of your system, like database status or cache status. And then, really importantly, full error context.
Right, with stack traces and all that.
Yes, exactly. So you can actually see what the code was doing.
It's like having a black box recorder for your system.
Well, that's a good analogy.
You can go back and replay events and see what happened.
Right, right. So the key principle is, think about what information you'll need to actually solve a problem. Not just log the bare minimum.
And again, that's something we really emphasize at Stonefly, providing rich and relevant data so that you can actually gain insights.
Right, right. Okay, so now let's tackle the issue of volume.
Okay.
Because high-traffic applications can generate a ton of logs.
Oh, yeah.
And that could be expensive.
For sure. Storage costs are a real concern.
So the video talked about this concept of log sampling.
Log sampling.
Yeah, have you heard of this?
I've heard of it, but I'm not totally clear on how it works.
Okay, well, the basic idea is that you don't store every single log event.
Okay.
You only store a representative sample, like, you know how at a poll they don't interview every single person? They
Right.
just they just talk to a sample,
Right.
and they can still get an accurate picture of what people think.
I see. I see. So you're saying you can do the same thing with the logs.
Exactly. So, for example, imagine an authentication service that logs every single login attempt.
Right.
You could implement like a 20% sampling rate.
Mm-hmm.
So only 2 out of every 10 login attempts would actually be stored.
Okay. And that would save a lot of space.
It would.
Yeah.
But the important thing is that you're still capturing enough data to see the overall trends.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a sudden spike in failed logins, you'll still see it.
Right, right. That makes sense.
And the really cool thing is that you can actually be strategic about what you sample.
Oh, how so?
So, like, let's say you're seeing a lot of a certain type of error.
Mm-hmm.
You could temporarily disable sampling for those errors, so you capture every single one
Okay.
while, maybe increasing the sampling rate for other events that are less important at that moment.
Oh, I see. I see. So you can adjust the sampling based on what's going on.
Exactly.
That's really smart.
And there are tools that make this really easy to do,
Oh, great.
like OpenTelemetry, which has built-in sampling features.
And this can save you a lot of money too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like in terms of storage costs?
The video said you could potentially reduce your costs by 80% or more.
Wow. That's significant.
It is. So it's definitely something worth considering, especially if you have, a lot of traffic.
It's just like how Stonefly focuses on efficient data management
Right.
with our SAM solutions. We understand that you need to optimize your resources.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's talk about something that's particularly challenging in modern distributed applications. Understanding the flow of a request across multiple services.
Oh, yeah, that can be a nightmare.
It can, and the video talked about 2 really interesting concepts: canonical log lines and distributed tracing.
Okay, I've heard those terms before, but I'm not sure I fully understand them.
So imagine you have a request that goes through, 5 different services.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, you might log events as they happen in each service. So you'd have a log message saying, request received in service A, then request processed in service B, and so on.
Right, right.
But the problem is that if something goes wrong, you're left trying to piece together this puzzle.
Oh, yeah, trying to connect the dots across all those different logs.
Exactly. So a canonical log line is like a summary of the entire request.
Okay.
It's logged at the very end of the request and captures all the key information.
So it's like a movie summary.
Yes, exactly. Like a movie summary or a TLDR for the request.
I like that analogy.
So it might tell you, who the user was, what they did, if the request was successful,
Mm-hmm.
any errors that occurred, the total duration, maybe some performance metrics.
That's really helpful.
It is, because then you have all the essential information in one place.
Right. You don't have to go hunting through different logs.
Exactly. And then distributed tracing takes this a step further.
Oh, how so?
So instead of just having a summary at the end,
Mm-hmm.
distributed tracing actually lets you follow the request as it hops from service to service.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
It's like a map of the request's journey.
And there are tools that can do this.
Oh, yeah, there are dedicated tools for distributed tracing.
Okay.
And they use this concept of traces and spans.
Traces and spans.
So a trace is the entire life cycle of the request.
Okay.
And a span is like a segment of that trace representing what happened in a specific service.
I see. I see. So you can see exactly what happened in each service and how long it took.
Exactly. It's really powerful for understanding complex interactions and finding the root cause of problems that span multiple services.
It's kind of like how Stonefly, we provide this robust data infrastructure,
Right,
and we understand the importance of tracking to data interactions.
right,
Making sure everything isn't connected.
right, right. Okay, so now let's talk about something that can be a real headache: having logs scattered all over the place.
Ugh, I know exactly what you mean.
Right. Imagine you've got a web server, a database, a caching layer, a bunch of microservices, each generating their own logs and storing them in different places.
It's a nightmare trying to find anything.
It is. So the solution is to centralize your logs.
Centralized logging. Okay.
Yes. So you bring all those logs into one place.
And then you can search across everything.
Exactly.
See the big picture.
The big picture, yes. No more SSHing into a dozen different servers.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right. And the best part is that you can start to correlate events across services.
Oh, that's really powerful.
It is.
You can see how different parts of your system are interacting.
Exactly. So, if a user can't check out, you might be able to trace that back to, a slow payment service,
Hmm.
which caused the shopping cart to time out and so on.
Wow. You can really see the cascading effects.
Yes. And the advice is to start centralizing early, even if you only have a few services. It'll
Okay.
pay off later when your application grows.
Makes sense.
And it's the same principle behind Stonefly SAN solutions.
Right.
Centralizing your data makes everything easier to access and manage.
Exactly. And Stonefly has over 2 decades of experience helping customers do just that.
That's right. That's right. All right, so you've centralized your logs, but now you have another problem. Too much data.
Oh, yeah, storage isn't free.
Exactly. So we need to talk about log retention policies.
Okay, so how long do you keep logs for?
Well, it depends, right? The video suggested having different retention periods for different types of logs.
That makes sense.
So maybe you keep error logs for 90 days, so you could do post-incident analysis.
Okay.
But debug logs, those are probably only useful for a week or so.
Right.
And then, security audit logs, those might need to be kept for a year or more.
Right, for compliance reasons.
Exactly. The key is to be proactive and set up a policy early on.
Before your storage costs go through the roof?
Yes, exactly.
It's just like any other data management, you know? You have to have a plan.
Right, right. And Stonefly really gets that, we're all about data lifecycle management. So we understand how important it is to have those policies in place.
Absolutely. Because you don't want to just be storing everything forever.
Right. Okay, so moving on to something really important, security. Logs often contain sensitive information.
Oh, yeah. You have to be careful about what you log.
You do. And the video gave some examples of companies that learned that the hard way.
Oh, no. Like what?
Well, remember that time when Twitter accidentally logged passwords in plain text?
Oh, no. That's terrible.
It was a big deal. So there are certain things you absolutely should not be logging. Passwords, obviously, credit card numbers, social security numbers,
Right.
API keys, anything that's, personally identifiable information.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're not logging those things directly, you have to be careful about indirect expose, like logging an entire user object,
Right, right.
which might contain sensitive data.
So what can you do to prevent that?
Well, the video mentions some good practices, like, first of all, just be mindful of what you're logging.
Right.
Second, use logging libraries that have built-in protections against, accidentally logging sensitive stuff.
Okay.
And then you can also set up filters in your logging pipeline
Oh.
to automatically redact any sensitive data.
That's a good idea.
And there are tools that can help with that, like the Open Telemetry Collector.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different ways to approach it, but the bottom line is that you have to be really careful.
Yeah, because once that data is out there, it's out there.
Exactly. And Stonefly, with our decades of experience in data storage,
Right.
we really understand the importance of security. We take data protection very seriously.
Absolutely. And we definitely advise against logging any sensitive information.
Right, right. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about performance.
Okay.
Because logging can actually have a performance impact on your applications.
Oh, right, because it's using resources.
It is. It's, writing data, using CPU, using memory.
So how do you minimize that impact?
Well, the video gave some good tips. First of all, choose an efficient logging library.
Okay.
Because some libraries are much faster than others.
They even showed a benchmark comparing different libraries.
Oh, right.
And the difference was huge.
It was
like a 20% performance difference.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it really does matter.
It does.
And then, log sampling, which we talked about earlier.
Right.
That can also help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you can consider logging to a separate disk.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't interfere with the main application.
Exactly.
That's a good idea.
But then, just do some load testing to make sure logging isn't causing any bottlenecks.
Right, right.
And this all ties back to, Stonefly's focus on high performance.
Mm-hmm.
We really care about efficiency and minimizing overhead.
Absolutely. We want our solutions to be as fast and reliable as possible.
Right, right. And the same goes for logging. You want to get those insights without slowing down your application.
Exactly.
Okay, so one last thing we need to talk about.
Okay.
And that's the difference between logs and metrics.
Right. They're not the same thing.
They're not. It's a common mistake to try and use logs for everything.
Like for real-time monitoring.
Exactly. So the video really emphasized this. Logs tell you what happened. Metrics tell you how often things are happening.
Right.
Or what the current state of something is.
Okay.
So trying to use logs for real-time monitoring is like trying to use a screwdriver to hammer a nail.
Right. It's the wrong tool for the job.
It is. Metrics are much better for spotting trends, for setting alerts,
Mhm.
for getting a real-time view of your system's health.
And that's so important.
It is. It is. So use logs for debugging and use metrics for monitoring.
Okay, got it. Logs for what happened, metrics for how often.
Exactly.
That's a good way to remember it.
And this is something that Stonefly, with our experience in data infrastructure and monitoring,
Mm.
we really understand.
We know that you need both.
Yes, you do. You need both. All right. So that was a lot of information, but I hope it was helpful.
I thought this was really useful.
Good, good. So just to quickly recap, we talked about having a plan, using log levels effectively,
Right.
structuring your logs,
Right.
capturing the right details,
Yeah.
managing log DONM with techniques like sampling.
Right.
And we talked about canonical log lines, distributed tracing, centralized logging retention policies, security, performance, the whole 9 yards.
It's a lot to think about, but it's all important.
It is. And the key takeaway is that good logging makes your life so much easier.
Oh, yeah. It saves you time. It saves you frustration.
It does.
It helps you build better software.
Absolutely. So our call to action for you today is to go back and look at your current logging practices and see where you can make improvements.
And don't be afraid to experiment,
Right.
Try different things. See what works best for you.
Absolutely. And, if you have any tips or tricks that you've found useful.
Or any logging horror stories?
Oh, yeah, we'd love to hear those too.
Share them with us.
Please share them. And, as you're thinking about all this, here's a question for you to consider. What's the first area of your application's logging that you're going to revisit? What needs the most attention?
What's causing you the most pain.
Right. What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah.
And on that note, I want to thank Stonefly.com for sponsoring this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks, Stonefly.
Stonefly is a pioneer in SAN technology with over 2 decades of experience helping customers manage their data. You can learn more about their solutions at iscoosdicez.com or stonefly.com.
Or email sales@stonefly.com.
Right. And just like Stonefly is committed to making your data work for you, we hope that this deep dive has given you the tools and the knowledge to make your logs work for you too.
Absolutely. Better logging, better software, better sleep.
Better sleep, yes.
That's what we all want.
That's the dream.
Thanks for listening.